Welcome to the RMCC compliance update for March 2022 in the Northeastern region. You're going to notice that things are a bit different around here, so I am now doing these compliance updates in more of a podcast style. And if you want to be first to be notified when these videos are released, then make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel or sign up for our compliance newsletter. All right, so let's dive right on into the Northeastern region. Starting out in Connecticut. So proposed change. A new Connecticut bill could kill cannabis gifting and billboard advertising. So from the article, House Bill 5329 would outlaw gifting cannabis in any scenario where there is also a donation made, either directly to a cannabis producer or in the form of an entrance fee. It also outlaws any transfer of cannabis in a place of business outside of a licensed retailer or medical dispensary or a giveaway associated with attendance at an event. The description of what is not permitted closely resembles the High Bazaar, a cannabis event that has been held almost every week in Hampton since adult use cannabis was just legalized in the state last summer. I laugh because there's always some sort of loophole people are trying to get through. Another one out of Connecticut. So Connecticut doubles down on mold and yeast content regulation change. And so this article is out of Gronin. So Gronin is a really great news article. They also send out different emails and things like that. And so a lot of our updates out of the Northeast region will be coming out of Gronin articles. So Connecticut's Department of Consumer Protection took a step back from its previous decision to increase testing thresholds for mold and yeast in cannabis, following public outcry over the state's attempt to quietly make the change in 2022. The state increased the amount of allowable mold and yeast in cannabis in mid-2022 from essentially like 4 decimal places of colony forming units per gram to 6 decimal places, so 100 times more. The change in enforcement also includes a zero tolerance for Aspergillus bacteria, but they were also made without a formal change in regulatory language in mid-2022. All right, let's go on over to Maine. So Maine, the state fires back in Maine's residency appeals case. So from the article, Maine regulators fired back at a patients group in a briefing filed February 28th in the Federal First Circuit Court of Appeals a month ahead of the scheduled oral arguments over the state's residency requirements, which bars multi-state operators from owning medical cannabis dispensaries. Arguments in the case focus on the Dormant Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which bars states from interfering with interstate commerce and whether or not it applies to cannabis while it's still illegal on the federal level. A court precedent on states' residency requirements in cannabis, which elude the original attack on Maine's requirements, would have implications across the country. The federal court decision in a state has already been cited in other cases, such as when a federal judge in Missouri struck down that state's residency requirement for cannabis licensees on October 7th. While a case in Detroit, Michigan awaits a 2022 trial, Missouri officials have indicated they will not appeal the ruling and will abide by the circuit court's ruling. So if you're not familiar with the Dormant Commerce Clause, this is going to be a pretty big deal for legalization. And I think this is like this article says, a sleeping giant that none of us are prepared for, to put it bluntly. It's going to have impacts not only from like residency requirements, but also different things with interstate commerce. So a background of interstate commerce, the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution prohibits state laws that unduly restrict interstate commerce under a well-established doctrine created by the U.S. Supreme Court and known as the Dormant Commerce Clause. Under the doctrine, state laws prohibiting the import and export of state legal marijuana are almost certainly unconstitutional. So another really great article. So this one is coming out of Yale Law. And then also MJ Biz did a really great article as well and it's titled How Interstate Commerce Could Upend the Marijuana Industry. Another really great article produced over a year ago. So take a look at that. If you are not familiar with the interstate commerce and the dormant clause, then take a look because it's going to get gnarly. All right, another one out of Maine. So proposed change. Maine legislature considers removing drug offenses from license barriers. About time. So from the article, Maine's legislature is considering whether or not to eliminate past drug convictions as a restriction against caregivers or operator license status as a means to address the desire for social equity in the market. Thank goodness. The bill LD 1957 amends existing state laws, replacing marijuana with cannabis in the language, and more impactfully, eliminating restrictions on individuals with prior drug convictions from becoming caregivers or employees in the state's medical cannabis industry. And here's a really nice quote here from State Rep. Margaret O'Neill. Equity must be at the heart of cannabis legalization. Legalization alone cannot heal the harm from the war on drugs or mass incarceration, but efforts across the state can ensure the legalization does not perpetuate those same harms. Wrote State Rep. Margaret O'Neill, legalization must benefit individuals and communities most harmed by the war on drugs, namely people of color and people with low incomes. Love it. Let's do it. All right, switching on over to New Hampshire. So New Hampshire legalization bill that would create state-owned dispensary monopoly moves to floor vote. So from the article, a bill that would legalize cannabis in New Hampshire, creating a tax-free state-run dispensary monopoly to compete with the state's medical marijuana program, cleared its second committee on March 21st, leaving one last House vote to determine whether or not to continue to the Senate. The bill would create a tax-free adult use market. Tax-free. That is crazy. Threatening the state's medical cannabis program due to the lack of limits on cultivation, according to Matt Simon, a longtime medical cannabis activist and spokesman for Prime Alternatives Treatment Center. Medical dispensaries must exist as part of the vertical integrated operations, and they must all cultivate their own supply. Without a limit on cultivators for the adult use market, it would be hard for medical dispensaries to compete. HB 1598, which was introduced in January 2022, is a bipartisan legalization bill sponsored by 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The bill was released for the House Ways and Means Committee on March 21st after the committee approved a third amendment to the bill. The committee vote was 12-10 partisan vote, with the majority Republicans moving the bill to the House floor despite Democrats' attempt to place it in interim study. Well, that's interesting. All right, moving on to New Jersey. New Jersey enters cannabis track and trace contract with Metric. So from the article, the state of New Jersey entered a contract with Florida-based Franwell's Metric, which provides cannabis track and trace systems to state governments across the country. The finalization of the contract was announced March 11th and followed approval by the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, CRC, earlier this year. New Jersey is Metric's 18th government contract for track and trace systems. New Jersey has a legal medical cannabis program since 2010 and legalized cannabis for adult use since February 2021. Metric systems offer an RFID tag model, which each individual plant and product is traceable through a patented radio frequency identification tag, allowing for seamless data tracking for each plant, optimizing inventory control and cultivation management. Sure. All right, one I'm really excited about. So New Jersey now accepting applications to operate legal marijuana dispensaries. So on March 15th, New Jersey began accepting applications to operate dispensaries. Applicants who are women, minorities, and veterans will get review and approved first, as well as those who have been convicted of marijuana offenses and people from lower income communities. I absolutely love what New Jersey's doing with their hierarchy on how they're grading all of the different applications. Applications are coming in on a first come, first serve, first review basis. And then depending on if you're woman owned, minority owned, in a impact zone. All of those different things will determine what pecking order your application is going to be reviewed under. I also think their grading process is pretty smart because it's either you get all the points or you don't. There's no like in between there. So I'm really excited. I'm working with a woman-owned business and just submitted her application within the first 5 to 10 minutes of the portal opening on March 15th. So I am so incredibly excited for them and to see where their new journey takes them. All right, last one out of New Jersey. And a surprise, New Jersey legal weed sales delayed again as state panel says big applicants not ready. So in a surprise move, a state commission on March 24th delayed approving the expansion of 8 medical marijuana dispensaries to start selling recreational weed in New Jersey as soon as late April. The expansion of the 8 alternative treatment centers, or ATCs, to begin selling weed expected by the industry experts was put on hold by CRC Executive Director Jeff Brown. Said the commission wants plans for how they can accommodate both medical marijuana patients and those seeking to buy recreational cannabis. Brown said that the centers simply don't have enough weed, contending that the market may be short by 100,000 pounds to meet medical and recreational populations. He said the commission will conduct site visits in the next few weeks of the 8 ATCs to make sure they can handle both medical and recreational marijuana customers, noting that the commission wants separate lines and entrances for customers. So New Jersey is taking a very similar approach that Colorado did back in 2014. So what they're doing differently though, and I had direct experience with this back in 2014, is making sure that there's enough supply for the medical patients. Back in 2014 in Colorado, we pretty much just shifted all of our medical inventory over to the adult use side, sold through it within like a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then we had no product in the market. It was a nightmare. And so I really love that the CRC is putting medical patients first and making sure that they have the supply that they need for their medicine. Yes, it's a bit challenging. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, things are getting delayed again. However, I would rather see that the medical patients have the variety that they need for their medicine than to just, oversupply the adult use and just see it go out the wayside. Some other interesting things here, the CRC noting that they want 2 separate lines and 2 separate entrances for customers. Colorado and some local jurisdictions also required something similar as well. I do find it interesting because I'm like 95% sure that is not in the regulations anywhere. However, similar to like Colorado, Michigan, and Massachusetts, there will be something called a dual supply chain. So in metric world, you'll have blue tags and you'll have yellow tags. Everything needs to stay completely separate, and that is a challenge with inventory control. It's not like California and Oregon and Nevada where you have a single supply chain and it's the time of purchasing that determines if it's medical or adult use, with the exception of Nevada because it's actually the distributor that determines if it's adult use or medical. Anyways, so yeah, excited to see what's happening in New Jersey. Yes, it's delayed again, but I would rather to make sure that they have the inventory supply that they need for their medical patients. Alrighty, let's switch on over to New York. All right, in New York, 57% of New York's municipalities opt out of adult use cannabis sales. So from the article, the New York State Office of Cannabis Management released the names of 600 cities, towns, and villages that opted out for either hosting an adult use retailer, consumption site, or neither in late January, affecting where cannabis sales take place in the state. Importantly, the opt-out option applies only to cannabis sales, production, growing, and manufacturing were not allowed. Experts say that the number of opt-out municipalities is likely to dwindle as the adult use market ramps up. Municipalities had until December 31st, 2021 to pass local laws requesting the state to opt their jurisdiction out of hosting these kinds of licenses. And as we can see here, the top 5 counties with jurisdictions that opted out of cannabis sales: Nassau, Westchester, Orange, Chautauqua, and Jefferson. And damn, Nassau County on Long Island has a population of 1.39 million people. Man, get them the weed. All right, another one out of New York. And from Vicente Cederberg again, I really love their updates. They're just so well written and clear and concise. So flippin' helpful. So thank you, Vicente Cederberg. New York hemp farmers will be able to grow marijuana under a provisional bill signed by the governor. And then we also have a follow-up one to this too. So good news and bad news. So from Vicente Cederberg, today the New York Cannabis Control Board, CCB, announced the March 15th opening application period for conditional adult use cultivator license and draft regulations for awarding the first batch of adult use retail licenses in the state, the conditional adult use retail dispensary licenses. Okay, so here is a breakdown from the article from Vicente. Okay, so here's some details from Vicente Cederberg. So conditional adult use cultivator licenses. The Empire State hemp farmers who received a conditional license will be permitted to grow and/or process cannabis starting in the 2022 growing season to be eligible for these conditional licenses. Applicants must have been licensed by the state to grow and/or process hemp as of December 31st, 2021. The application period opens on March 15th and will close on June 30th, 2022. While an article from Gronin states there aren't that many hemp growers in New York eligible for cannabis licenses, from Gronin, the New York's new law allowing hemp growers to grow THC cannabis is actually leveraging a relatively small group of growers and leaves a much larger group of CBD sellers behind, says advocates. But allowing these new licenses to cultivate cannabis likely does not do much for the state's goal of promoting cultivators of color. The vast majority of these licenses are located in rural communities, and although Gronin has not confirmed this information, it is unlikely these licensees are operated by diverse owners. Hemp growers aren't rushing to apply for licenses yet. According to the Office of Cannabis Management, as of yesterday, which was March 23rd, not one hemp grower has applied for a cannabis grower license so far. So awesome that New York's doing this, but it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of people eligible to actually take advantage of this new requirement to get more licenses. More licenses up and running. Awesome. Another one out of New York. So New York prioritizes social equity operators with Seedling Opportunity Initiative. In the first week of March, New York Governor Kathleen Hochuli announced the Seedling Opportunity Initiative, putting social equity candidates first in line to make retail sales in the state. The governor is boasting a first-in-the-nation tag with this move, which is a strong effort to ensure the percentage of social equity operators in the state does not dip to the threshold seen across the country. To qualify for the conditional license, an applicant would need to have been convicted of a cannabis-related offense prior to March 31st, 2021, when the state's adult use legalization law was enacted. Those who have a parent or legal guardian, child, spouse, or dependent who face such convictions would also be eligible, as would those who were themselves dependent on someone with a conviction. Exciting stuff. All right, let's go on over to Rhode Island. New cannabis legalization bill introduced in Rhode Island House and Senate. So from the article in Providence, Rhode Island, a new plan to legalize recreational cannabis in Rhode Island was introduced in the House and Senate for the first week of March, kicking off which would be the months of debate before a final bill is potentially approved. So we got a long way to go, but hey, things are happening. All right, and the last update for the Northeastern region for this month, Vermont adult use application window approaches despite hurdles. So from the article, aspiring cannabis operators in Vermont will be able to apply for pre-qualification status on March 16th, but state regulators caution that the bureaucratic hurdles may be hindering that process during the March 14th meeting of the Cannabis Control Board. The state will begin accepting applications for small cultivation licenses for those seeking no more than 1,000 square feet of cultivation space and testing lab licenses. On April 1st, the state's first medical license holders will also have the opportunity to apply for adult use status on the same day. 1 month later, the remainder of the prospective cultivators can apply. Aspiring operators can apply for manufacturing or wholesale licenses on July 1st, while applications for retail licenses can be submitted on September 1st. The board approved Rules 1 and 2, which establish how cannabis licenses are issued and the rules that govern the use of these licenses, respectively. Rules 3 and 4, which cover the state's medical cannabis program and license enforcement, still have open comment periods that must be completed before they can be approved. The fifth and final rule, which has not yet been submitted for public approval, governs how board members can be removed from the CCB. And that is your updates for March 2022 in the Northeastern region.